So from that on, it's made people much more aware of those sort of situations. And of course, in murder of gaseous poisoning, of course, this is Reinhard Heydrich, a nasty piece of work. He was responsible for designing the concentration camps and specifically designing them for mass gases. This resulted in extermination of millions of Jews, gypsies, and others who the Nazis decided were undesirable. They used carbon monoxide again, and this stuff, Zyklon B, which is a cyanide-based pesticide. And this one, I'm sure you know this story. Actually, it's a fascinating story, which, well, I haven't got time to talk about. There's a lot of dental in that. But there are lots of books and films about this case. But the address has become famous or infamous. Actually, I don't think the address is there anymore. But in the late 40s and early 50s, John Reggie Christie killed his victims using domestic coal gas, and then raped them, and then put the bodies behind the walls and under the floorboards in the garden. There was at least 8 victims, including his own wife. He also murdered the wife and child of his tenant, the chap that lived upstairs. This was Timothy Evans. And in fact, Timothy Evans, you may remember, he was executed for the crimes that Christie committed. Awful. And this was one of the major crimes that led to the abolition of the death penalty in the UK. That was in 1965. I like this one. It's very appropriate, isn't it? Okay, well, now a story about a dentist, actually. In 1991, I'm going to take you to Portadown in Northern Ireland. You can see the spot there. And every profession's got its bad eggs. Many doctors have become murderers. And in fact, in another presentation, I think a couple of days' time, I'm going to talk to you about Murderous Medics. You can guess 2 or 3 of the people involved in that, but anyway. So there was, Crippen, Ruxton, Shipman, of course, amongst others. Anyway, I'm only aware of 2 dentists that have murdered, and this is one. This is actually not the dentist, this is an actor. This is James Nesbitt, who was acting in a sort of what they call a docudrama about this case. And he starred as a chap called Colin Howell, a dentist. And this is Colin. Colin was a dentist, a respected member of the local community, deeply religious, a father of 10, yes, and a former lay preacher. And he met Hazel Stewart. She was a Sunday school teacher at the church, and they had a passionate affair. But so that they could be together, Howell arranged to kill both Hazel's husband, Trevor, who was an RUC, a police officer, and his own wife, Leslie. So they arranged this killing. They were both given sedatives and then put in a car. And it was made to appear like a suicide pact between Trevor and Leslie because they were so distraught about the affair of Colin and Hazel. So in 1991, the bodies were found in the fume-filled car in a garage behind this terrace of houses. And the story of the suicide was accepted by the authorities. Howell's relationship with Hazel didn't last, and he married again. In 1998, 7 years later, he confessed to the murders to his new wife. She agreed not to inform the authorities, and actually she was investigated, but she wasn't actually charged. I think his conscience got him in the end, actually, and in 2010, 12 years later, Howell again confessed to the murders to the elders in his church, who of course then informed the police. In November 2011, at Coleraine Courthouse, Howell pleaded guilty to the murders, and he got life imprisonment of 21 years. Coincidentally, when they investigated further, he was also found guilty of administering drugs to some of his patients with intent to commit indecent assaults, but we'll move over on that one. His lover, Hazel, claimed in court that she'd acted under duress, but the jury did not believe her, and she was sentenced to 18 years as well. Howell was sent to the maximum security Maghaberry prison in Northern Ireland. And this is the bit I do like. The newspapers called him the driller killer. So, again, using gases as a poison. This one I like, this headline, yeah? It's going to be a bit difficult, isn't it? Okay, so go back to the little bit of the science again, I won't try not to bore you too much, but a bit of the science, there's types of poisons. So I'm going to talk about how they affect. The oxygen replacing poisons, we've already talked about that, that's the hemoglobin type thing, cyanide, carbon monoxide, that sort of thing. Causes headaches, dizziness, cessation of breathing. The blood poisons, they call blood clotting and septicemia. Increases the white cells. Things like that are ricin and rattlesnake venom. And again, if weakness and vomiting and heart failure. The nerve poisons, they block the nerve transmissions from the brain to the rest of the body. Examples of this are insecticides, curare, the hemlock I talked about, and Novichok. The breathing difficulties, there's pinpoint pupils, sweating, muscle spasms, and death again. The muscle relaxants, well, they slow down all the muscles in the body, both the voluntary muscles and the involuntary muscles. And particularly the involuntary muscles of the heart, which slows and stops. And examples of this are digitalis, of course. There's visual disturbances, irregular heartbeat, and eventually death again. Narcotics, well, of course, they block the synapses back into the brain. And therefore messages to and from the brain. And things like this are obviously opium and heroin. And of course these are quite pleasant in small doses. There's relief from pain, sleepiness, falling blood pressure, seizures and coma. The corrosives direct onto the cells that the corrosive liquid touches. So it's absorbed obviously through the eyes, the mouth and the lungs. Examples of this are mustard gas, chloroform, and it produces coughing, choking, eyes watering, that sort of thing. And the last one is the systemics. These are absorbed by all the cells in the body, and the functions of all the cells are disrupted. It's pain, vomiting, diarrhea, thirst. If it's acute, but if it's chronic, over a slow period, there's a loss of appetite, loss of weight, and anemia. And examples of this are some of the chemical weapons they've been using in Syria recently, strychnine and arsenic. Excuse me a second. And I wanted to talk a little bit about arsenic because it's one of the most renowned poisons. This is Matthew Orfila. He was a pioneer in toxicology. He was born in Spain but lived most of his life in France. And he researched poisons and catalogued their effects, usually by experimenting on pigs. Pigs are often used for experiments because they're very similar to human, their physiology, etc. But he was particularly interested in arsenic. And he also made an important discovery that buried bodies can absorb arsenic from the surrounding soil. Now that's quite important. So if a body is exhumed after being suspected of arsenic poisoning, it's very important to test the soil around to make sure it's just not absorbed arsenic from the soil. Arsenic is almost tasteless, odourless. It was cheap and it was used very often to kill vermin. But used as a poison, the body slowly deteriorates and it mimics some natural diseases. And this is why it was quite difficult to find it whether it was being used. And the reactions and symptoms are variable for each person. So the killer can strike more than once and it has different effects on different people. The body can't get rid of it, can't excrete arsenic. So there's slow build-up. And thus it was often administered over a long period in small doses. However, it can be isolated from the hair and the fingernails. So James Marsh was quite important. He developed a very sensitive test for arsenic so that it could be found. But despite this Marsh test and an Act of Parliament to restrict the use of arsenic, it did not deter would-be poisoners. Now, this is actress Joanne Froggatt, also in Downton Abbey. I'm sure you've seen her. And again, she played the part of Mary Ann Cotton in another TV docudrama. Now, this is Mary Ann Cotton. Her maiden name was Robson. I hate to add no relative of mine, although my family did come from that part of the world originally. She became a notorious serial killer. She was born in a village near Durham, And in 1852, at the age of 20, Mary Ann married a colliery labourer, William Mowbray. This is her. I don't know if you can see it very well, but it's her in the middle with her 5 children all around. Surprisingly, her husband and all the 5 children died of intestinal disorders. And actually, very conveniently, all were covered by life insurance. She collected a payout of £35 on William's death, and that's equivalent to about £2,000 in today's money, quite a lot, and smaller amounts for the children. After this, she worked in an infirmary at Seaham, that's near Durham, where she met a chap called George Ward. And then they married. He was a sickly man and he died about a year later. This is 1866 now. Once again, the insurance money was very useful. A month later, she found an employment as a housekeeper with this man, James Robinson. He worked in the shipyards. A month later, she moved in with him permanently and his 3 children. And then Robinson's baby died of gastric fever. They later married, and in fact, he was the only husband to survive. Soon after, Mary's mother became ill. Mary went off to look after her. She initially began to recover, got better, but then developed stomach pains